Okay. Okay, thank you. And I wanted to thank Stephanie Kelton, who was the first person to suggest this conference to me when she was over in Toronto several weeks ago, when Steve was there, and Scott Fullweller, and Nathan, and Michael Hudson too. But she's not here, so you guys should pass my thanks to her. Oh, well, it's recorded, so now she knows that I'm thanking. There are three things I wanted to say before we start. They're all in this slide. Two are explicit, one is implicit. The first one is that I'm not Fidel Kaboub. He's going to be talking at 3, despite what the program says. So if you are here to listen to him, you now have a few seconds to leave discreetly. The second one is that this is not the title that is advertised in the program. So I'm doing something that I hate when I organize conferences myself, that the person submits a paper and then presents another one. But I thought it was appropriate because we have some new results here that I was looking at the other papers being presented, and all relates to austerity and government spending. So I thought you would like this much more than stochastic differential equations. And the third one is that I'm in the mathematics department, not in economics. So that's the implicit warning. So there will be equations, plenty to come. So if I follow the advice of Hawking, that each equation that you put there reduces your audience by a half, by the end of the talk you'll be reduced to an infinitesimal. But don't despair, because there are also loads of graphs and movies. And see, I'm losing one person already. Not just for the fear of equations. So that's the expectation. I raised the expectations, and then that's a very rational reaction. Very well. So here is the first set of equations. Well, those are not real equations. They're just definitions. So, whenever I give this talk to mathematicians, I spend a lot of time with the introduction, the difference between neoclassical and heterodox and so on. But I'm skipping everything here because you know that difference much better than I do. So I'm jumping straight into the modeling. I hope you're not going to mind. So the starting point is a pretty two-dimensional model by Goodwin, goes back to 1967. And so here are the assumptions. So the ingredients of the model are, well, the labor force, the productivity, and then this is just a relationship between total output and capital. It's full capital utilization. There's an output to capital ratio there. And then that's equal, on the other hand, to productivity per worker times the number of employed workers, which is L for the labor force. So that's not anything mysterious. It's just a definition of those quantities. Then there are the two essential, if you like, behavioral assumptions of the model, that the change in real wages is governed by a Phillips curve, which we're going to assume. So it's Phillips curve as a function of employment, not unemployment. So if you're familiar with the decreasing function, I'm going to be using an increasing function. And the second one is that all investments, so kappa dot is the change in capital. So it's the differential of capital. So it's new capital that is coming in. So that's investment. That is in the whole of the profit. So Y is output minus what you pay in labor costs. So that's the net profit for the capitalist. And everything is reinvested, and nothing more or nothing less. Well, there's depreciation there because capital does depreciate. So this is just saying that there is no money coming out of the system and no money coming into the system through private debt. So this is a model without banks, if you like, one that neoclassicals would like. So then you just work out the, you define this two state variables. So one is the wage share. So the wage share is just the total amount that is paid in wage divided by the total output, and then the employment rate. So labor force divided by the total population. And you work out the differential equations that are satisfied by this, and it turns out to be this two-dimensional system of differential equations, which is then isomorphic to something that has been going on in the literature of ODEs for a long time, the predator-prey model. with two species, one dependent on the density of the other. And now it's very well known that this system has just one non-trivial equilibrium point, which happens to be non-hyperbolic. So that is, it's neither a sink, so things don't converge to it, nor a source, things don't go out of it. So for each initial condition that you have, the only thing that happens is that you circle around. Okay, so it's the trajectories are all closed cycles, and they work like this. So let's see if it's going to work. Oh, come on.
That's really good.
Yeah, that's the first.
What happened there? Oh, damn. Right, this is a new movie running elsewhere, no? I don't know why, mate, unfortunately.
Okay, no problem. We can ignore that.
Okay.
So I'll tell you what the movie was going to be showing. It was going to be showing this. And where the variables are the wage share and the employment. So, you know, you have a situation where both wage share and employment are increasing, and then eventually there's too much wages, and then, you know, profits are not that high, then the capitalist needs to start a decrease in the employment, and then it goes down a bit, and then eventually workers start to take some moderate wage cuts, and then wages are down again to the point that it's profitable to hire again, so the employment increases. And that just goes like that. But fortunately, I have a snapshot in time of what happens, I hope. Steve, now
maybe it's actually
loading, yeah.
Okay, let's just go 5 pages down. Oh dear.
Now, yes. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, now, yes. Yeah. So this is after everything runs. So this is now time, and this is the two variables. So wages and employment, and it's very boring. It just circles around like that. So this is, if you like, a very simple model for endogenous business cycles. Okay, but of course, reality is not like that. There are many ways to extend this, and an essential extension that you need to do is to allow for injection of endogenous money, exactly what Steve was saying in his talk. So how does that go? Well, this is what I call the Keen model. So Steve did that in his PhD thesis. And the idea here is to modify in an essential way one of the behavioral assumptions of the model, which is to say, instead of just invest in profits, the capitalists will invest a superlinear function of profit. So instead of being just, you know, the identity is a function that goes like this. So it means that when profits are high, you're going to be investing more than the profits. Well, where do you get more than profits? You borrow. And when profits are low, you're going to be divesting. You take it away, and you're trying to pay debt. So this is the relation. So kappa, the function kappa, is a increase in function of this, which now plays the role of net profits. So that's what it was before, total output minus what you pay in wages, but now you also need to pay debt. Very well. So now this it's a slightly changed equation for the evolution of GDP. And what I want you to pay attention is this growth rate here. This is the growth rate of the economy that now depends on how much is being invested. Okay, and now the third dynamical variable is the level of debt. So before we only had wages and employment. Now, because it depends on debt that is being increasing or decreasing, then there is this dynamic equation for debt. And if you see, if this function happened to be the identity, then this would equal to that, and the change in debt would be 0. So it would neither increase nor decrease, which would then reduce to the previous model. Now, there are 3 differential equations then, not 2. And if you know about dynamical systems, now that's where the fun starts. Because dynamical systems don't exhibit any interesting behavior in 2 dimensions. For example, there are no Lorentz attractors and things like that. Now, with 3 dimensions, things start to be exciting. So here's what we're going to do here. So try to identify some of the equilibrium points of this 3-dimensional. So instead of being just that one boring equilibrium, now there's a whole class of them, but I'm going to concentrate on the only 2 that are economically significant. The others, you can show that they are structurally unstable, so they don't matter. So the only 2 that are really significant are what we call the good equilibrium and the bad equilibrium. There might be the ugly one, but I didn't put it there. So the good equilibrium is what replaces what you had before in the Goodwin model, except that now it is a source. So it's an equilibrium that is defined by these equations. So you just put back in the system, and all the differential equations equal to 0. So that's a dynamic equilibrium. And you see here there's a finite level of wages, a finite level of employment, and a finite level of debt. So that's the important characterization of the good equilibrium. And then you show that the growth rate at the good equilibrium just equals to the increase in population and the increase in productivity, which is what you would expect. If everything else is at its sort of stationary point, then the economy just keeps growing at the growth of population and productivity. Okay, but that's not the only one. There's the bad equilibrium. Now, the bad equilibrium, you don't necessarily see it in the original system because it corresponds to debt going to infinity. Now, to see the bad equilibrium in the equations, you do a change of variables. You look at 1 over debt, which you then call this variable u. And now, if you rewrite the system in terms of u, you see that 0, 0, and 0 is an equilibrium for the modified system. You plug 0 in there, and then all the equations equal to 0, so nothing moves. Now, think of what this is. This means 0 wage share, no money going to workers, 0 employment rate, and infinite debt. Debt goes to infinity. Very well, and now, so this corresponds to this modified equilibrium of the original system. And now you can look at the stability of those two equilibria. I'm going to skip the analysis. How am I doing with time?
I'm fine, I'm 10 minutes in.
Okay. Very good. The stability analysis will show you that for a wide range of parameters, so this is very sort of structurally stable. So something is structurally unstable if you just modify a little bit of the parameters, and then the behavior of the equilibrium changes. It goes from, locally stable to non-locally stable. This is for a wide range of parameters, and happen to be the parameters that are most common in real life. Both equilibria are locally stable. So try to think of this as you have this, three-dimensional system. There's one point there. There is the good one. And if things start sufficiently close to it, they will go to that. Now, the bad equilibrium lives in the boundary, lives in debt equal to infinity. And again, if you start sufficiently close to the boundary, that is to say, sufficiently far from the good equilibrium, you will converge to the boundary. Okay, so now you have these two, and they are locally stable. So it's a situation that you need to take seriously, because depending where you start, you're going to converge to one or the other. Very good. So here is now the movie is not going to play. We can try.
Oh, great.
No,
black on black.
We went to the black hole already.
Copying my clothing style, obviously.
But again, I have the picture of what it shows after the movie runs. So I'll tell you what the movie would show. The movie would show something like this, going to a point. Okay? And this is what you see in time. So as time passes, all the variables oscillate and converge to something finite. And y is output. You can't see because the scale is too fine, but y is not just monotonically increasing, it's sort of oscillating, but overall it increases at the rate of population growth and productivity growth. So that's what you want, but that's not what you always get. Sometimes you have explosive debt. So I'm not going to even try to show the movie, go straight to the picture. The movie would show this. It oscillates a little bit. You think that it might go to this, the good equilibrium, but it doesn't. It oscillates a bit, and then that starts to increase, and then it increases a bit more, and then boom, it shoots off to infinity. And that's what you see here. So the variables, for a while they oscillate. You think that the economy is doing just fine and dandy, increasing, and then at one point that becomes just overwhelming, and this is what I call the unstoppable march to Zuccotti Park. Where there's zero employment and zero wages and infinite debt. And so that's just the situation as the system is. It's unavoidable that it depends on the initial conditions. Well, if it depends on the initial conditions, then you better pay attention to the initial conditions. But if the analysis ended there, then there would be not much that we could say. But of course, you see from the anticipation here. So your rational expectations is that I'm going to say something more, and that is indeed rational because, well, this is not unstoppable. It's only unstoppable if you do nothing. But what can you do? Well, there is no government in the model yet, so the whole point of today's talk is to give you an idea of what can happen if the government is introduced in the model. So this is something, the two sessions are the new stuff, and I teamed up with people in the mathematical biology group at York University in Canada, because when they saw me giving the first version of the talk, they said, what you're trying to obtain is that that doesn't go to infinity. So it means that 1 over that doesn't go to 0. It means that if you think of 1 over that, the U, as a species, it doesn't get extinct. Now think like a mathematical biologist. They know a lot on how to avoid extinction of the species through policy. What kind of policy? Like, you know, for fish, you don't go harvesting fish all year round and so on and so forth. So that's an entire theory called persistency. So I say, let's try to use the tools of persistency to see if we can show that under certain regimes, U doesn't go to 0, which means private debt doesn't go to infinity. Very well. So we've been working away on this for the past 6 months or so. So here's, but before we go to that, that's the basin of convergence. Those are all the points for which you would go to the good equilibrium. If you start outside the good equilibrium, then you don't go to that. You can't prove that you necessarily go to the bad one, but you're close to the basin of attraction of the bad one. Okay, so here's the introduction of the government sector. So again, Steve had it in his paper in one version. I did in a different version. Then I visited him in Australia, and he convinced me to do, not in his way, but an amalgamation of my way and his way, which we now call the unified government intervention in the Keen model. It's a mouthful. But so the idea here is that you introduce 2 more dynamical variables into the system, spending and taxation. And you break them down into 2 very distinct quantities. One, G1, is what we would call non-discretionary spending. So that's government spending that is always there, and even at the good equilibrium, you wouldn't go to 0. You wouldn't disappear. You expect government to still exist in some form. You know, it's what they said after the midterm election when the Republicans, the Tea Party, went ballistic. But they were still complaining that they didn't get that much. And I said, look, we still need some government. There are traffic lights and things they need to maintain. So that's the idea here. There's the non-discretionary part of the spending. And then G2 and T2 account for what you can really be creative in your policy response. So this can be either stimulus, so the first thing that you want to do here is to prove persistency. So you go into the obvious assumption that expansionary policy is expansionary instead of contractionary. So that's what you try to show first. And then once that is a sufficiently positive result, you show that austerity is really a bad idea. So G2 and T2 could be either positive or negative, whereas G1 and T1 is some government spending and taxation that it's always there. Okay, so now the system is unfortunately now not a 3-dimensional system anymore. It's a 5-dimensional system, but you manipulate the variables a little bit, and you see that what you really need to pay attention to is the net profits, which consists of what you had before, total output minus wages minus repayment of debt, but now plus government spending minus taxation. So this is, you know, a simple expression of what you are all familiar, sectoral balances and so on, that a deficit in the government sector is a surplus in the private sector. So now you pay attention to that variable together with the other 2, and you can show a bunch of interesting things. So I think now I'm ready to show all the final examples. Yes. So for example, what happens if you have good, so I'm going to go through several graphs now and walk slowly through the results. So the first one is just you have good initial conditions. What does that mean? It means that, you know, the wage share is high, the employment ratio is high, well, not that high, but high, and debt is not so high, and then you just put government in there just to see what happens. So in all the pictures, I know it looks like a lot in the picture, but let's go slowly. In each one of the pictures, what you see here in the top panel is employment. wages. So employment is the blue line, wages are the black lines, and then private debt is the red line. Down here is the government debt and taxation and government spending. So the green line is taxation and the blue line is spending. And then the dotted line is what the model would be if government was not there. So this here compares with benign initial conditions what the effect of government is. And you see that it's not too radical. What it does is that it dampens the oscillations, as you would expect from stabilizing the economy. It just decreases the amplitude of the oscillations. But in the long run, since it's a Keynesian conference, in the long run, you're not that, but you are at a situation where you have a finite level of employment, finite level of wages, and finite level of debt. And you made things slightly better. You increase the long-run employment, and you increase the long-run wage share. Okay? So this is, in good conditions, adding government is harmless. For bad initial conditions, what this is showing is that adding government is actually an improvement. So this now, for the dotted line, you would see that about 50 years here, debt would explode. Private debt would explode, and wages would drop down to zero. Because you are at very bad initial conditions, 20% employment, 20% employment, that's 80% unemployment. So I'm showing here that, yeah, no, it's almost Spain, yeah. So this is showing that, you know, with bad initial conditions, you add government, and what government does is it has the capacity to bring the system from the really bad equilibrium back to the basin of attraction of the good equilibrium. But that's not universal, because you could make really bad initial conditions. So now I'm starting with 1% employment. So 99% are unemployed. 10%. 10%, that's correct. That's very mathematical. I'm starting with 10% employment. So 90% of people are unemployed in this fictitious world here. And this is showing that now it goes to infinity in both ways, both with or without government. But that's because the reaction of the government, and I go back a little bit, it's this eta max. So eta here is the strength of the government intervention. And eta is a decreasing function of employment. If employment is high, the government intervention needs to be small. If employment is zero, then the government intervention needs to be very aggressive. So eta max is a parameter of the model, and it's a bifurcation parameter of the model. And what you show is that, okay, I'm back to the really bad initial conditions, but with a timid government, that the maximum that they do is 4% of GDP of stimulus at the zero point of employment. And then there is no hope for the system. It goes to the bad equilibrium regardless. However, if you start with really bad initial conditions, but a very aggressive government, so responsive government, the government is prepared to put 20% injection of GDP out of the blue to save the system. It does save. It brings it back from a catastrophic explosion in debt to a sort of finite level of private debt. So that's it for now. That you know, it's just showing, you know, the kind of commonsensical conclusion that the government can stabilize this unstable system. Now, really to conclude in the final minutes, it's the effect of austerity. So because now you can investigate in this model. I had, you know, government spending, the discretionary part was always positive, because you see the feature of this equation is that it's an exponential relationship. This is not. This is g as a function of y and t as a function of y. But this is g as a function of itself and t as a function of itself. So if it starts positive, it will remain positive. And if it starts negative, it will remain negative. And it can, at best, go to zero. So what happens if you want to do austerity, if you want to do negative spending in either a good situation or a bad situation? So that's the last couple of slides. So austerity in good times is harmless. What am I saying here is that, so again, the dotted lines is what, now it's a bit different. Dots are when you have positive initial government spending, and the solid lines is with negative initial government spending. So the only difference in the two lines is that the government spending flips from plus or minus 0.05, okay? And this just says that well, okay, if you are in good times, you're allowed to do austerity, and it doesn't change the overall asymptotic behavior of the system. But if you are in bad times, crisis, then austerity is kind of a stupid idea, because if you make a situation worse. So what you see here is, again, the differences between plus or minus. So the dotted things is with positive spending, the solid lines is with negative spending, and you see private debt going to infinity, employment going to zero, and wage share going to zero. Whereas if you had positive government spending, then you would see a positive full employment, wages not zero, and the level of debt also not going to zero. So I guess this is all, and then what's left? Well, this is all for without asset prices like financial assets, and also without inflation. So the next step in the model is to introduce, prices of capital goods and commodities, and I need to learn what the hell a Kaleskian markup theory is. Steve keeps saying that this is what I should do, so okay, I will do. And then we have some other work on doing stochastic extensions of this model with interest rate, and you can have also stochastic asset prices and levy processes, jump process, and so on. We also want to do, this was all for one economy, so like the world economy as a whole. You can have an open economy and put exchange rates, and then just extend now as a couple of more dynamic variables. And we already started calibrating this to macroeconomic time series. And somebody mentioned this morning bullshit macroeconomics. That's or maybe it's like anti-bullshit. I don't know. It's we're going to do very robust calibration. This is not VAR. This is really just simple calibration of very stable relations over 50 or 60 or so years. So I think that's it, and I'm on time.
Thank you.